Okay, so I will probably have a string of videos today. There's a lot going on. The G20 summit in Osaka. I'll probably have something to say about that and some of the issues around it. But anyway, for now, I want to talk about the media. And I want to talk about this specifically in the context of the United Kingdom. And I want to focus on the left right pendulum. That is to say, how do we perceive the media? The media. It's obviously not a single concept, a single thing. The media is a very broad umbrella term. The media can be broadcast news media, it can be newspapers, it can be news magazines, it can be social news media. There's a lot of different formats that we see, not just the news, but opinions um, on a wide range of issues. So, one of the main topics, one of the main talking points that has been very apparent, particularly, I mean, it's always been there on some level, but particularly, I would suggest, in the last 3 years with everything around the rise of Trump and Brexit. There has been a very robust debate about what is left, what is right, media bias, fake news, etc. Now, I don't propose to cover absolutely everything in one video, that would be impossible. But I want to cover some things. And just in case you're wondering, yes, I am in bed. It's quite early. So, just had a shower. That's why my hair is. Um, if you are someone who believes, oh, the media is all left wing, it's all out to, smear right wing political figures. It's all big one big liberal agenda. Then that will be obviously from the point of view that you're looking at it. You'll be looking at networks that probably do have some left wing bias. If you're of a left wing persuasion and you say, oh, it's all of a right wing bias, then the chances are you're focusing on networks, newspapers with a right wing bias. The truth is, if you break it down, it's probably 50-50. So let's just have a very quick summary here. Now, I know not everyone's going to agree with my outlook on this. Um, because some people may say, for example, the BBC is right wing. Most people would say it's pretty left wing, but some people, for example, people who support Jeremy Corbyn, might say, oh, the BBC's right wing. So this is also down to personal opinion, but this is my outlook. So let's just look at what media outlets could be described as left wing, broadly speaking. When we're talking about broadcast news, the BBC, Channel 4, I think it's fair to say they are regarded as having a left wing or at least a liberal outlook on things. Newspapers, The Independent, The Eye, The Guardian, The Daily Mirror, Morning Star, but to be honest, it's got pretty low circulation, so I'm not really counting that. But anyway, let's count it. Morning Star, I mean, it's pretty hard left, so there you have it. Roughly five newspapers. There will be others, and feel free to add on anything I may have missed out here, and two big networks. The let's look at networks outlets that are more to the right. Um, Sky News, ITV. I think is a bit of a mixed bag. I find ITV can be quite sensationalist, and that could go in either direction. But certainly, Sky News is associated more with the right and wrongly because of its association to Rupert Murdoch, whose family, of course, runs or ran the Sun and the Times. So, which brings me to print news, the Daily Telegraph, or as we know in the UK, the Torygraph, the Daily Mail, definitely. And I'll come back to the Mail because the Mail's an interesting one to talk about. The Sun, the Daily Express, the Times, I would say is centre right. It's definitely far more to the centre than the Telegraph and the other examples, but it is probably centre right. Very occasionally with a liberal outlook. Um, yeah. So, like I say, it's roughly a mixed bag. Now, a lot of this comes down to readership. All print newspapers have had a decline in readership. This is partly because of changes in the industry. More news media is now going online. I've been collecting newspapers for years, and I thought initially that was just a backlash with the phone hacking scandal. Actually, it's a trend in the industry as a whole. Probably in 10 years, there'll be very few print newspapers. In 20 years, there might be none, which I find would be a little bit sad, simply because of my own personal endeavor to collect newspapers, but that's not here or there. If you look at the bias, there is unquestionably bias. If you're looking, for example, at the way the BBC covered the Conservative leadership contest, the questions were set up in such a way that none of the people were. I was going to make a video on this, but I guess I'll encompass it here. None of the people were members of the Conservative Party. There were a few Wayne members who now voted for Brexit. There was people associated with the Labour Party. There was an imam who was asking about Islamophobia, who's subsequently been exposed as having some pretty dubious views of his own. Um, if you look at Question Time, there's long been allegations that Question Time has a left wing bias. But the caveat to this is if you look at the way the Daily Mail or the Sun reports things, and they have a much bigger readership than the I would suggest that the print news media is definitely balanced more towards, or disbalanced more towards the right. Um, and there will be right wingers who say, oh, the Sun isn't really right wing or the Daily Mail isn't really right wing because it's not right wing enough for them. And because the Sun will occasionally denounce far right groups. You know, I mean, the likes of the Sun isn't going to have any time for people like Tommy Robinson. So it's not a black and white thing. It's not like a simple case of left versus right. You get center right, you get center left, hard right, hard left, etc. You know, this is not something that can be so clearly pinpointed. Is there bias in the media? Without question, without question. And I find myself getting worked up, to be completely candid about it, in roughly equal measure with both sides. I get worked up with the BBC's blatant political correctness and refusal to, for example, tackle controversial issues like Islamic extremism head on by its name. But I also get very unhappy about the way the tabloid, for example, vilify the unemployed. The way the Daily Mail, for example, talks about people on welfare infuriates me. Um, I think the media is incredibly powerful in this country, and both left and right have responsibility. I think journalism is a difficult job. To be fair, I do think being a journalist is not an easy job. You have to do research, you have to check your sources. Sometimes you have to put up with heckling, you know, simply for doing your job. There's situations also where you can face real danger, not so much in the UK, but certainly frontline journalists around the world. So I'm not against journalists, but what I do find noticeable is the lack of introspection. I mean, a tabloid, for example, can make a mistake on their headline on the front page. All they would have to do is make a small amendment on page 25, page 30, saying, oh, we got that wrong. I think that's wrong. I think the odious practice of doorstepping needs to end. So, what I do find infuriating about the media as a whole, left and right, they rightly say their job is to hold the powerful to account, to ask politicians tough questions and others. But when the scrutiny turns on them, I think one problem with the media as a whole, the avenue for making complaints is not that straightforward. You try making a complaint about the way a newspaper's covered something, you can do it, but it isn't a straightforward process. They'll give you a dozen different links. In my experience, it is not straightforward. It's not a clear cut thing. And their retort would be, oh, but there's different kinds of complaints. We want to handle it as to which way is the most appropriate. I'll give an example. I wanted to complain to the Times about the fact they had engaged in doorstepping. So I phoned them up, and the girl on the operating desk gave me some email link where I had to click an extension to that email. And that wasn't even the same one as is mentioned on the website. So that's what I'm talking about. I do not think that the collective media make it easy to hold them to account. Ofcom, the principle of Ofcom is a good one, but I don't think Ofcom is anywhere near powerful enough. I mean, why have they not taken action against RT and CGTN, both the outlets of hostile foreign states? They've given verbal warnings to RT about its coverage, but they haven't really done much. I intend to write to them about it because I really do feel this is a matter of national security. I feel very strongly about that. But ultimately, if you focus a lot on how the media covers things, if you focus on that bias, you can get very angry and it can be very. Um, Sometimes I need to remind myself that they're powerful, but that power certainly has limits insofar as very few British people blindly believe everything the media tells them. Now, you could argue that the tabloids are sensationalist and they are influential, and I go with that. There's been examples of how, for example, the tabloids, or to give them the correct title, the red top press, has stoked up vigilantism, and innocent people, for example, have been falsely accused of being paedophiles because of the negligence in reporting, because of the unprofessional way the tabloids report things. One of my main contentions with the British media collectively is that when they get so vocal about the need for a free press, and I absolutely go with that, you need a free press in a democracy, but that must come with responsibility. And whilst there are many decent professional journalists out there, far too often we see a situation whereby when media outlets come under scrutiny, particularly if it's a politician, or that let me rephrase that, not even scrutiny, criticism. If it's a politician doing the criticizing, then they immediately get this defensive attitude of, oh, this is an attack on the free press. I find that very frustrating because they should be criticized. If their bias is so blatantly obvious that they're not trying to hide it and their only attitude to it is to get defensive and not kind of admit it. There has been in recent years quite an aggressive approach by too many journalists. This kind of gotcha style journalism. Now, to be fair, when politicians don't answer questions directly, they don't exactly help themselves. In that sense, I've not much sympathy. But when it's a case of, for example, we've seen it in general election time, the way Paxman just wants to set people up and he's not really interested in their answer. And he done it with both Cameron and Miliband. This to me is not being a good journalist. This is just being a bit obnoxious. You know, not letting people speak, shouting over people. Piers Morgan's another example. That sort of journalism I just find profoundly obnoxious. What a good journalist will do is hold people to account, ask them tough and valid questions, and I will defend their right to do that. And I think sometimes certain politicians, certain leaders get a little bit of a personality cult around them on some level, whereby their supporters think that they shouldn't be asked any questions. Now, that's clearly ridiculous. But a good journalist will ask tough questions, but they will let the person answer. They won't just seek to get a gotcha style situation or be hostile for the sake of it. We saw Kathy Newman the Kathy Newman Jordan Peterson exchange. Unfortunately, she ended up looking like the victim because of the way feminism has its influence on public discourse. But many people regarded that situation was she had went in to that interview not interested in a fair interview. She just wanted to set Jordan Peterson up. She just wanted to do a gotcha style interview. She was very aggressive. Um, and I think that was a big mistake. So journalists who are trying to make their name in the industry, even some established journalists, I think that the general public don't like that. It's a bad approach. It's very cynical, and I think they need to be aware of what they're doing. But anyway, I'll just conclude with this point. Of course, there's bias in the media. There is. There's bias in newspapers. There's bias in the broadcast media. But it is very important that we have a left-right pendulum that is very clear. Now, there's some outlets that are clearly right-wing, and there's some that are clearly left-wing. The very fact that that exists, that there is, like the Guardian is very different from the Sun, that's important. That in itself is important for democracy. And you might dislike or even detest certain publications. I certainly do. But it's important to have diversity in the media. And it's important that people, whilst the media has a lot of power, it's important that people also have vacuums to challenge media bias. I think, for example, politicians have every right to criticize the media. I don't think that equates to an attack on the free press. Journalists have a right to ask them tough questions, but politicians, frankly, also have a right to defend themselves and say, for example, that question has no relevance to my policies. Thinking of personal questions. So when I contrast a country like the UK to a country like China, where I have been, where the media is entirely controlled by the party, I know what I prefer. This is not to say that I don't get worked up by the British media. Believe me, I do. There's things I deeply dislike. I dislike doorstepping. I dislike these paparazzi style tactics. More than dislike, I loathe them, in fact. And I do think there should be laws against that. But when we talk about bias, I would suggest to anyone who says it's all biased, what you may be looking at may be biased. The BBC definitely has a left wing bias, for example. But can you honestly, hand on heart, say that the Sun or the Daily Mail doesn't? Can you honestly say that the British tabloids, for example, thinking here of Brexiteers, have been pro EU over the years? Hardly. So the way you look at things, next time, and I'm kind of telling myself this as I'm saying this, this is a lesson for me as well. The next time you get worked up at media bias, remember that somewhere out there, there's going to be an opposite view and there's going to be bias in the other direction. Truthfully, I don't think it's possible for any publication to be dead set in the middle. There was a newspaper paper a while back called New Day. It didn't last very long. They did attempt this thing whereby they would literally have one page would be one view, another page would be another view. Unfortunately, they didn't last very long, so it was difficult to tell what their outlook was. But that was an interesting concept. I have seen right wing opinions in left wing newspapers. For example, I've seen pro Brexit views in the Eye. I've seen some pretty conservative views in the Eye. And I have seen some fairly left wing views in the Times.